All right, so give me just 1 second. So we are going to go, it was my intent to share the agenda, but for whatever reason it is not, well, here we go. So let me see if I can share that right now with you guys while I'm still entering people into the room. So give me just a minute, please. Thank you. Like I was saying, we have a very robust agenda today. I'm going to just go ahead and get started. First off, my name is Mary Gutierrez. I am the director for Earth Ethics, which is a 501c3, and also Earth Action, which is a 501c4. I am also the campaign director for Northwest Florida for the Florida Rights to Clean and Healthy Water. And I want to just thank you guys for being here today. All right, and again, forgive me because I am multitasking here, letting people in and things of that nature. Okay, and for whatever reason, my computer has frozen up. So, yes. And again, if you are not speaking, if you could go ahead and mute so we can cut down on that background noise, I would certainly appreciate that. So, okay, there. Finally, it's cooperating with me. My apologies for that. Okay. All right. So, land acknowledgement. Prior to the beginning of our event, it is our practice to issue an acknowledgement that the land which the state of Florida occupies is the rightful indigenous land of the native peoples of America. The Seminole, the Miccosukee, the Creek, Anise, Appalachee, Yosemite, Timucua, Tequestra, and the tribe we call Calusa. This land is theirs. It is sacred. It is the duty of every person who occupies this space to respect it and to seek redress the foundational, injustice which established this polity. I want to acknowledge further that the state of Florida, which we seek to transform the policies of, has been built largely on the coerced and unrewarded labor of the people of color, enslaved Africans and their descendants, and migrants from Latin America and the Caribbean. The alienation of native peoples from their land and the people of color from the fruits of their labor is not only a historically tragic, but an ongoing injustice that we must seek to readdress. The climate crisis and its impact on Indigenous people, Black people, and people of color are merely another manifestation of those ongoing injustices. Therefore, as we conduct our business here today, I implore the participants to place the necessity for restorative justice at the front of their minds. Okay. And with that, I will see if we have Elizabeth McWhinney who has joined us. And Elizabeth, if you are on mute, please come off mute. And Carl, if you could please mute, that would be great. Okay, so I am not seeing Elizabeth. And so I would like to ask one of our other faith-based individuals to, if they would like to do a opening prayer for us at this time. All right then. Hearing none. Okay, I will transition. I'm sorry?
Mike Ford is raising his hand, Mary.
Okay, I didn't see that. Okay, Mike, if you would please state an opening prayer, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Helps if I have my microphone. Let's meet an end to prayer. Almighty and gracious one, you gift us with a creation that is so wonderful and boundless, and we sometimes forget that we are not in charge, that we are stewards, and that land is not a gift for us, but a gift to us. We ask you to help us to remember that we are to take care of what we have been entrusted, that it does not belong to us, that it has never belonged to us, but it belongs to all creatures of this earth. So we ask you to bless us in this time, to gather us in thought and intent. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, so we're just going to dive right in, not unless there's some questions before we actually get started. Our first speaker is going to be Helena, who is with the University of Miami, who will be discussing South Florida water quality issues. Helena, if you'd like to do a better introduction of yourself, by all means, please do so before you start your presentation. If I need to make you a host, please let me know as well, if you have a PowerPoint that you will be sharing.
Yes, Mary, thank you so much. Yes, I will be sharing a PowerPoint.
Okay, and so I will make you a host. And just 1 second. Yeah, this might be just too much for one person to do.
I'd like to, my name is Helena Solo Gabriel. I want to thank Mary. Thank you so much for inviting me, and also Richard Whitman for recommending me as well. Richard and I have been long-standing collaborators over the years. Even when he was way back in at the Great Lakes, he's well known for his research in the Great Lakes, and now has transitioned to Western Florida. And so it's great to have him as a neighbor. I'm from Miami-Dade County, and I'm a professor of environmental engineering at the University of Miami. I've studied bacteria at beaches for many years. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
You are now a host. So.
Okay, thank you. And I was told I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to zoom through these slides. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my expertise and what we have observed at the beaches in South Florida. And what we look at are the bacteria called enterococci. So evaluating the sources of enterococci. This is a project with students of Fifa Abdulghani and Peter Sawell. So what is enterococci? These are bacteria that are found in our gut. They're in our gastrointestinal tract. And we use them in environmental studies to indicate potential fecal sources of contamination, such as feces. Typically, they're traditionally associated with human feces, but that's not necessarily the only source. And they are used to determine whether or not a beach has been contaminated by waste, human waste. And the way we measure it is we take a filter, we put water through it, and then the filter is so tiny that bacteria get stuck on it. And so every bacteria then grows. We put that filter onto a media for growth, and then it grows into a colony. And so you see the blue colors here, which represent a colony, a million bacteria that have grown overnight at that one point. So every colony represents an original bacteria that was found in that sample at that point. In Florida, the beach monitoring program consists of sampling beaches on a weekly basis. It's not only Miami-Dade County, but the entire state. And the data that is collected is posted on the Florida Healthy Beaches website. They categorize the beaches as good quality when it's less than 35 colony forming units, or dots, blue dots per 100 mils. When it's moderate, between 36 and 70, and then poor quality when it's above 71. So 71 is like our baseline for poor quality. So the objectives of our study, we focus predominantly in Key Biscayne, Florida, which is a beach right off of Virginia Key in Key Biscayne. And this particular beach is known for being south of a large wastewater treatment plant, the Virginia Key wastewater treatment plant. It's a central district wastewater treatment plant that has an outfall that discharges out about a mile into the ocean. It services a population of about 830,000 people. So it's it's a big sized wastewater plant. And originally the thought was that this beach, Key Biscayne Beach, was having elevated levels of bacteria. And immediately the wastewater treatment plant was being blamed. And so we were contracted to start looking at, well, what is the source? And so, we did look at the wastewater treatment plant. We looked at operational parameters of the wastewater treatment plant, correlated that with what we saw at the beach. We also suspected human and animal sources. So not only do we have sewage going out to the ocean that could be a source of the fecal indicator bacteria, and that's why enterococci was originally made, or identified, was because it's a good indicator of wastewater from wastewater plants. But other sources of enterococci include humans themselves, people who go bathing in the waters. We have it on our skin. We have, it's on us. And so human bathers shed enterococci into the water. And then also there are animal sources such as birds and dogs also release enterococci to the water. And then there's another possible source, which is seaweed and other factors. And looking at this particular beach, when we set out to look at it, was very unique from the point of view of the amount of seaweed, because of the geography of the area, had a lot of seaweed. And then they had a very interesting practice of integrating the seaweed. They would cut the seaweed and put it into the sediment or into the sand. We set out to do a sampling program to first identify where is it coming from? Is it coming from out offshore, or is it coming from the shore? Because that's the first question to ask. We want to know, is it that wastewater plant distributing, wastewater back to the beach, or is it coming from the beach itself? So we set up a sample program to look at water, sand, and then also because there was so much seaweed, we also looked at the seaweed. This is just an example of the different zones of sand that we collected. We collected a really dry sand, we call the supratidal sand. And then there's the sand that's integrated with the seaweed. You can see a little bit of the darker color here with the integration. The intertidal sand, which is the one in the swash zone, and the subtidal, which is the sand that's underwater. We also collected water at knee deep, ankle deep, and also waist deep in different depths as we went away from the shore to see, is it higher concentrations offshore, or is it higher concentrations onshore? Because that'll tell us where it's coming from. This is just a picture of Key Biscayne Beach after an integration event, and you can see the tracks from the tractors that were used to integrate, break the seaweed into the sand. You can see the discoloration of the sand. The sand is typically a very light color, a light tan color, that you can see by the integration that it turns into a darker color, organic looking, especially as the seaweed decomposes. And so it almost looks like a soil on the edge of the beach. It's just some results from our water sample, as you can see, and we have many more data points since then, but the ankle deep water had the highest, and this was consistently observed throughout our study. The highest levels were observed in the ankle water, in the knee water it was the middle, and then the waist offshore was the lowest. So we suspected immediately that the source was coming from the shore. It wasn't coming from the wastewater plant, it was coming from the shore. And then also the sand samples, we also looked at the subtidal sand. The subtidal sand had the lowest levels. The intertidal sand was intermediate. The highest sand concentration of bacteria in the sand was either in the supratidal sand, just above the integration zone, or sand from the integration zone. So right there, we were honing in on the elevated levels of enterococci, which we suspect are coming from the integrated sand zone. And then we also analyzed seaweed, and we see the seaweed with values that change. If we see levels going all over the place, low values, we see really high, about thousands. So really high levels in the seaweed. And we found that earlier in the season, the seaweed was fresh and the bacteria was low, but as the seaweed started to decompose, the levels went very high. And this is just some of the results from the plates. Again, you can see the dry seaweed. I mean, the colonies are coming off the plates. There's just so many of them. And you get lower and lower as during different times of the year. So our conclusion from this initial study in Key Biscayne was that the dry seaweed, especially as the seaweed was drying, was a major source of the enterococci, and that the integration of the seaweed, and it was just too much. I mean, the natural environment can handle the seaweed, but it was just too much and too much integration for the beach to handle, in that the bacteria just took over as the seaweed was decaying, and then caused the elevated levels in the beaches, in the water at the beach, causing the closures. So that was the first part of what I wanted to present. The next part was, I'm an engineer. And as an engineer, we're always looking for solutions. So, okay, too much seaweed is causing a problem. So what is a possible solution to the issue, especially when we get overwhelming amounts of seaweed on the beach? One solution that we've been looking at is using it as compost. And my student, Afifa Abdulghani, has been the one really leading this particular effort. And this is in collaboration, not only with myself, but with professors at the Marine campus at the University of Miami, and also professor from University of Florida, IFAS Center, listed there. And what's continuing us to motivate for looking at the seaweed is the fact that it's not only this one beach. I mean, we looked at it at Key Biscayne Beach, but we have a trend in the enteric oxide levels. This is all of the beaches for Miami-Dade County. All of the beaches, this is the data that we see where the levels of enteric oxide, so the higher this line, the more enteric oxide. And as time has been going on, the enteric oxide levels have been going up and up and up and up. And what we've been seeing as well at the same time is that the seaweed levels that have been accumulating on the beach have been going up and up as well. And we find good correlations between the bacteria and the seaweed levels that have been coming, the influxes of seaweed to the beaches. So the overwhelming amount of sargassum, and you can see in the background here that this is Key Biscayne Beach, when after an integration, they already integrated, and you can just see the mounds of seaweed and more seaweed coming in from the water. It was just overwhelming the beach. It's just too much for the beach to handle. And so in those particular cases, seaweed is good for the beach, but in cases where it's just too much, we started looking at composting. We did tumbler composters. This was during COVID. We were set up right before the COVID pandemic, and they shut down the university. But we had already put the seaweed fresh right in the composter, and nobody was allowed to go back. We came back in October, and the whole thing had converted to compost on its own. So we just put in the tumbler, and it converted to compost. And we had a significant reduction in the amount of material. Also, Afifa at that time took the material and grew radish seeds, and it is capable of growing plants, just as illustrated here. And she also looked at different mixtures of seaweed with other materials. She looked at the compost, the seaweed washed, unwashed. We were worried about the salt, with grass clippings and also with mulch. And again, it disintegrated right into like a sandy material, a sandy mulchy material. And the only issue that we found with the mulch was there's one concern with the metals and arsenic, as sargassum has natural background levels of arsenic that it has. And so there's some questions about the values of the arsenic that we see in the compost. And for example, we see up to about 25 or 26 milligrams per kilogram, when the regulations can be below that. So that's the one only question right now in terms of the sargassum compost. And I want to also mention that we did this research in collaboration with Hallandale Beach, where they allowed us to mix the sargassum with their vegetative waste. And again, it produced a very nice compost soil material. And also we are collaborating with the city of Fort Lauderdale. They have a full-scale recycling process for seaweed, where they convert it to compost, and it's a viable process. And I was amazed when I went to the facility that there's no insects, no smell. I mean, it's just a large mound that is just disintegrating into sand and dirt. So it was a very amazing experience, and it's a very viable alternative. So I know that I only have 15 minutes, and so I wanted to leave it with that for now.
I do have a couple of questions in the chat. How far back has this data been collected for the state of Florida, and have other states shared data as well? That's from Sue.
Okay, I guess it depends on what data we're looking at, but for example, for the issue of the amount of seaweed coming on shore, that data goes in the city of Fort Lauderdale is very progressive. And the reason they keep track of that data, how much is coming on shore, is because they compost it. And they have data going back all the way to 2010. So about 12 years.
Okay.
So the seaweed issue has, been getting documented for that. The amount of seaweed has been documented for that period of time. Our study in particular started in 2019. We just recently finished it.
Okay. And do you know about pulling water hyacinth off of Lake O and then being used as a compost? Aquaponics with and the Army Corps doing this, and that is from Holly.
Yeah, I think I've had similar questions. Not only the sargassum is characteristic of the Atlantic Ocean, but I've had similar questions with West Coast type of macroalgae, the Lingbia. And this is also a great question with the hyacinths. I would presume that it can be made into compost. I don't see why not. To me, the plants accumulate nutrients. They convert energy of the sun into the plant material that can then be harvested and processed to make compost. And so to me, it's a resource that we should be using instead of disposing.
Okay. All right. So we've got, I'm going to go ahead and take these two other questions. If you see moderate on the Florida Healthy Beaches program website, isn't that still something you don't want to bathe in?
It's really up to the individual as to whether or not they want to, what threshold levels would be acceptable to them. If it's poor quality, I would avoid. If it's moderate, I mean, it depends. If you're immunocompromised, yeah, I would avoid. A lot depends, on the situation too. I've had similar situations where like might take the kids to the beach, you're already there. It's a one-time thing, and you think, well, what are the, you just make sure that you have proper hygiene. If you eat at the beach, that you wash your hands before you eat the food. Take a shower after you're done. Once you get home, maybe take some extra precautions in those particular cases.
Okay, and we have one final question from Wendy. How long does it take for colonies to form on filter samples?
It takes 24 hours. So we incubate those at 1 day.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
And there was a question about arsenic.
Yeah, we'll take, this is the last question, then we need to move on. Thank you. Yeah, does arsenic contact, you mentioned, affect the type of use for resulting compost?
That's the only question that we need to investigate further. But yes, the arsenic is something that has been brought up as far as whether or not it's suitable. Like, for example, right now there's some concerns about can it be taken up into the plants that are being grown, and then people would eat those plants. So the question is, can it be used for edible plants or ornamental plants? Yeah, but it is something that needs more work.
Okay, so if you could return the host back to me, it appears a couple of people are trying to get in. So I can let them in, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. But thank you so much, Helena. And if you don't mind, could you drop your email address into the chat? And then that way, if people have any follow-up questions, they can just reach out to you.
Okay, yes, I'm just trying to, I will put it in the chat, but I'm trying to unhost myself and I'm not sure how to do it.
Okay, so if you go up to my name, well, never mind. I mean, I just did it myself. Okay.
Okay.
And
okay.
I'm letting 5 additional people in right now. So give me just a second. And my apologies to the 5 people that were waiting. I was not host at that time. And of course, Helena was presenting, so she could not see that you guys were waiting to get in. And of course, this is, if you missed anything, this is being recorded and it will be shared on Florida's Right to Clean Water, Clean and Healthy Waters group. And if you were not speaking, if you could mute yourself, that would be wonderful, because that would cut down on the background noise. So moving on, a lot of science. For non-science people, that's a lot of cerebral stuff, not to insult anybody's intelligence, because I know we're all passionate and caring individuals on this call, or we would not be here, right? But this call is more just not only about science, it's also about our, obviously, as the name implies, about our responsibility to the earth, okay? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brooks. Brooks, if you could come off mute, and then please share a little bit about yourself and about your faith belief and responsibility to our connection with the earth. So,
I thought I was the next one up. I'm not sure.
oh, okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Mary, then.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm not seeing Brooks anyway. So yeah, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to speak on behalf of the Buddhist tradition for the Season of Creation opening event here in Florida. Buddhism teaches that all things, all beings, are part of the basic Buddhist tenet of dependent origination. This means that all things are caused to be when the right conditions appear. For example, a seed can be planted in the ground, but unless it has the proper conditions of temperature, water, and sunlight, it will not grow, or it will grow improperly and then die too soon. Our current degradation of our Florida waters was caused to be by human mismanagement. When conditions in the past arose and humans thought that the waters needed to be channeled in new directions, humans caused these waterways to exist, changing the former ecosystem. Examples of this were repeated over and over again throughout Florida, so that now the natural flow of waters has changed drastically. Humans have also added pollutants into the waters, causing aquatic life to sicken, die, change migratory patterns. Our abundant, healthy aquatic life no longer exists as it did. Conditions have changed, caused by us. How would Buddhism say that we should respond? First of all, Buddhism would say that our belief in an independent self is a delusion. Everything and everyone is interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent upon one another. We are all equally important, necessary, and to be valued. Humans are not superior to, but part of nature. We are not destined to control nature, but to live in harmony with it and all living beings. Since we have ceased to live as we should, we have created the conditions that cause our environment, specifically in tonight's case, our waters, to suffer. But if we can cause the water to suffer, now we also cause it to be healthy again. Humans must awaken to what Buddhists term their Buddha nature. All living beings possess the nature of a Buddha. We are all connected to the great life force of the universe. This is not a creator God, but Buddhists see this life force as the energy that keeps the universe in harmony. But we have the power, so to speak, to do or not do what keeps this harmony going. Humans, rocks, ants, kings, presidents, the poor, the outcast are all equal and connected and part of me. So if I kill a spider, I kill part of me. If I pollute the water, I pollute part of me. If I raise up the downtrodden, I raise up myself. So we are not only killing ourselves by polluting the waters we drink, recreate in, and breathe around, but we kill a bit of our interconnection with all of life. I also kill part of you. Only when we can nurture and develop a deep, deep reverence for all of life, all of nature, can we really revere ourselves. This deep reverence would be an acknowledgement of the Buddha nature of everything around us. And whatever we do to them, we do to ourselves. Just as Jesus said in Matthew 25:40, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. If we can revere our waters as the sacred, special part of nature that they are, we could not conceive of harming it. And this only goes for all living beings. We would revere the life of everyone and everything. Buddhism has a bodhisattva, kind of what you would think of as a saint, called in Japanese Kanon, in Chinese Kuan Yin, in English, the regarder of the sounds of the world. She is often depicted as having many hands and many heads. In each hand, there is a tool, a different tool for helping, such as a piece of medicine, a walking stick, so forth. And each of the many heads go around the body, seeing and hearing everything that is going on. She is the embodiment of absolute compassion. She hears the cries of those in pain, the dying, the sick. Like a mother hearing her child cry, she rushes to help. So must we become the embodiment of compassion right now. Can you hear the cries of the rivers, of the Gulf, the lakes and the ponds? We must rush out and help them right away. We must, in fact, become the embodiment of regarder of the sounds of the world. We must hear the cries of the waters, and with our combined compassion and wisdom, provide them with help. Your heart will be your guide. Maybe you will do a beach cleanup as you take a beach walk. Maybe you will join a river keeper or other water group to monitor your waters and send out alerts if a manatee is in distress or blue-green algae is in your canal. Or maybe you will petition the government for change. But the deeper you revere the waters, the more these feelings will just come naturally. For it is our true nature after all. We are all one, we are all love. And as the waters have loved us since our planet began life, now we must love it back. May it be so.
Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. Thank you. We will now turn it over to Brooks, who has since joined us. If Brooks would like to share, come off mute and share about his faith belief with our connection to the earth. I'll also allow you to, or not allow you, but I would also ask that you share a little bit about yourself as well for our guests here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Brooks Barron. I'm the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ, and we have some 5,000 churches across the country. I came to this work about 7 years ago after having been a pastor in the state of Washington, and that's kind of when I first got involved in environmental work through campaigns related to closing down of a coal plant and fighting what would have been the nation's largest oil terminal at the time. And so I came to this position, and for me, one of the joys of my position is that it puts me in touch with the history of the environmental justice movement. And I invite you to think of it as your history. I'll kind of speak to it from through the lens of the United Church of Christ, but really I think it's a history for all of us to tap into. And so that history began what will be 40 years ago on September 15th of this month. It was that day that a group of people marched from a church in Warren County, North Carolina, and put their bodies on the road to prevent dump trucks from arriving. And that nonviolent action campaign would then go on to last 6 weeks, with over 500 people being arrested, many of them children and youth who were arrested. And to kind of back up and to know how they got to that point on September 15th is to know something that relates to this gathering, I think, today, which is that there had been a company that had been hired by the state of North Carolina to transport toxic waste out of the state of North Carolina. And they decided that to save some money in the middle of the night, they wouldn't leave the state. Instead, in the middle of the night, under the cover of darkness, they would spray known carcinogens, PCBs, next to the roadside. And thousands of gallons were sprayed all along the roadside. And eventually it was discovered that this had been done. Ultimately, people would go to jail for this. But people began to see what we now know are hazmat suits. They kind of look like people, wearing spacesuits out on the side of the road, and people became very worried that something was so dangerous that people were completely covered in order to be anywhere near this substance. And so the state of North Carolina decided that they're going to gather up all that waste, and then they had to figure out where they were going to dump it. And common sense would tell you not to put it anywhere near where there's a high groundwater level, right? But that's exactly what they did, because they were making a different calculation. And 1982, history of segregation alive and well, just as it is today. And so the state of North Carolina chose to put it in the county that had the highest percentage of Black population in the state of North Carolina, and was one of the poorest counties in the state of North Carolina. And so that decision was what led people to march from their church down to put their bodies on the road. And there was a couple lead organizers from that protest. Number one being Dolly Burwell, who was a member of a UCC church and was on the board of Martin Luther King Jr.'s organization. She became a principal local organizer. And then she realized when people were getting so riled up and not knowing what to do with herself, she had her pastor, the Reverend Leon White, come and train people in nonviolent action. Leon White was a veteran of the civil rights movement himself. And so they got arrested on the first day. Dolly showed up with her 10-year-old daughter, Kim Burwell, who was then interviewed by Dan Rather on national news. And as she was crying, as her mother was loaded up into the wagon to be taken off to jail, and that interview kind of went around the nation and pricked the consciousness of people. And people began to realize that what was going on in Warren County was going on in other parts of the country as well. And a person who came on the second day was a person who had recently come out of a number of years in prison in North Carolina. And there had been an international struggle to free him and others, known as the Wilmington 10. That person was the Reverend Benjamin Chavis, a minister in the United Church of Christ. And he had no intention of ever going back into a North Carolina prison. But as he was driving to bail out the people who were arrested on the first day, he was pulled over and arrested for driving too slow, and ended up being locked up himself. And so Ben Chavis went in to become kind of the key, leader in what became known as the environmental justice movement. And he was often credited for coining the phrase environmental racism. And so he would later go on to head the NAACP and so forth. But that was kind of the watershed event. It was to the environmental justice movement what the Montgomery bus boycott was to the civil rights movement. And so to kind of move forward in history a little bit, other things would happen. We published the first kind of report to comprehensively demonstrate environmental racism throughout the country in terms of where toxic waste is dumped. And then in 1991, we hosted the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And out of that came the environmental justice principles, which were soon circulated around the world. And one of the things I kind of would point out and kind of in reference to this event today is sometimes I'll have people say, you know, there's people in the United Church of Christ, always white, will say to me, you know, they'll point to our history of involvement in environmental justice and say that as if it's proof that we're anthropocentric. And that's never been the case with the environmental justice movement. It's never been just about humans, right? And one way to really point to that is to the very first principle of the environmental justice principles, which I'll read to you here. The very first principle says, environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, and the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction. And so, those are three, you know, critical events for the launching of the environmental justice movement: the Warren County Civil Disobedience Campaign, the publishing of the Toxic Waste and Race Report, and then the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And so it's that history that, you know, I think is for me and for many, I think, sacred history. And I'm always going back to it and finding things that are relevant. You know, so in Warren County, we can see, you know, we can't take clean water for granted in a society of inequalities, and often those inequalities have to do with race and poverty. You know, moving forward, I think, you know, there's been other kind of pivotal moments in the United Church of Christ, and the last one I'll just mention was kind of most recent in some ways, when we come together every 2 years as a denomination for our General Synod. We pass resolutions. We like to pass environmental resolutions. And so our most recent environmental resolutions was to affirm and proclaim the rights of nature. And so I'll just, you know, read to you just a couple of lines from that so you get a flavor of what that statement was like for us. But, you know, it calls for humans to have a dramatic shift from the point of view that the earth and all her resources are available for our sole benefit. It says that nature is not ours for enslavement, but was created as a mutually sustaining ecosystem, which is not to be destroyed or abused. People of faith are stewards of the land in our care. We proclaim publicly the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and all those who live in it. Psalm 24, verse 1. And then the resolution also declares that the earth is an original gift to sustain all life. And goes on to also say that we uphold the ecological principle that the rights of nature supersede harmful and destructive property rights, for the balanced cycles of the natural world must be protected as a common good for the present and future generations of human life and biokind. And so that kind of takes us more to the present day of kind of the United Church of Christ, and where we've come. And for me, part of the spiritual sustenance to keep on going in the movement is to realize that we are a part of this larger movement that goes back 40 years ago. You know, you can take it back even further, but it goes back, and to me, it's an honor and a privilege that we have to carry on that movement today as people of faith. And so that's what I'd like to share with you today for my remarks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, that's wonderful to hear of all the work. It's sad that we still live in a society where we are still addressing some of these issues, but it is hopeful that there are people out there such as yourself doing this work that needs to be done. So thank you for sharing that with us. We
Sure,
appreciate
thank you.
And if you would not mind, if you would drop your contact information in the chat, so if others want to reach out and connect, that would be wonderful. So now we're going to transition into a piece of poetry by an extraordinary poet as well as a community advocate. And I'm going to pass it to you, Deborah Stogner, for that. Thank you.
Deborah, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. At this very last moment, I'm still struggling over a poem. I have a poem picked, but there's actually another poem that I'm still struggling over. So I'm going to read this other poem, even though I'm not quite sure that it's actually finished. And there's kind of a reason for it. This poem is called One Quilt. I think it kind of fits better. And I don't want to get emotional. My grandmother, as most people of color did, and most Southern people, no matter what color you were, what race you were, had old quilts. And they were not fancy quilts, they were utilitarian quilts, and they were old scraps. And I was the only person in my family that wanted those quilts. So I have all of my grandmother's old quilts. And when she aged and her sewing machine broke, she hand sewed me a quilt. And I'm talking about the old time quilt with all the heavy batting in it. And I still have that quilt. I have a theory about quilts. I think that as people everywhere in this country and everywhere in the world, we are all single threads of a quilt. The whole world is one quilt, and we are all threads placed in that quilt. And that's kind of what this poem is about. So I hope you'll bear with me if it's not quite perfect. It's called One Quilt. History is a wise teacher, repeating lessons we fail to learn. We are individual threads woven into a single quilt, an intricate part of every detail surrounding us. Temporal human beings sharing one universe. Our ancestors wept and prayed in times of adversity. They labored in hardship, under sun and rain, to sow and harvest for provision and survival. Life-sustaining water cascading from heaven above, refreshing you, refreshes me in the exact same moment. Rays of warmth from the same sun touching me touches you. Under the same blanket of stars, we share the same dreams. Dreams for ourselves and our children to be free, have sufficiency, live in peace. This ground we fight over holds blood, bone, and ashes. Your ancestors and mine. When we leave this land of the living, we will be buried in the same ground. You and I will rest together for eternity, even if we couldn't live together temporarily. There is nothing new under the sun. Nothing can be added nor taken away. Seed merely reproduces itself, mingling in the earth together, generation after generation. A master weaver has placed the threads. The threads cannot be unweaved. We are woven into a single quilt, transcending all time, thwarting all attempts to redesign it. Thank you for bearing with me.
That was beautiful, Deborah. Thank you for sharing that piece.
Thank you.
I too have quilts that my grandmother made for us, all of her grandchildren. And I get and I appreciate that connectivity and the way you made it come alive like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, our next speaker is Dr. John Capisi. He is he is the Kissimmee waterkeeper, among many things, and he will be talking about Central Florida's water quality issues. And John, do you want me to?
If you could share the host rights with me,
Okay,
then
yeah,
and
okay.
I'll post my slides. However, my connection is a little rough here, so if my video drops, I've sent all of you a file that'll allow you to follow along if I have to resort to audio only.
Okay, all right. See if that works where you're allowed to share your screen. Or share the screen.
How's that?
Yep, we can see it.
Good. Let's see if I can get this out of the way. All right, so I was asked, and thank you for the invitation, I was asked to speak about water issues of Central Florida. And this is a talk, a portion of a talk that I did recently up in Washington, D.C. to the International Meeting of Waterkeepers. And it's a small section to fit into 15 minutes. We had an hour and a half up in Washington, so I'll keep it to 15 minutes here. My background, I serve as Kissimmee Waterkeeper right now, and that's a fairly new program, but I've been involved in waterkeeper groups since 1995. And my background is that of hydrology. I'm a hydrologist, agricultural engineer, and I served as a faculty member at the University of Florida at one of the agricultural research experiment stations, the one in Immokalee. My work on water issues in Central Florida goes back to 1979 when I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey doing computer models of flood studies for the federal flood insurance program. Then I got 3 degrees in agricultural engineering from the University of Florida, served as a faculty member, and then continued separate from IFAS, University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, after the year 1999. And that's when I really dedicated more of my time to advocacy rather than research. I'd always balanced it between the two, and that was part of the issue why I was not a great fit as an agricultural faculty member with the University of Florida. But I continue to work with the university and the University of Florida and other universities around the state. So let's see. All right, so briefly, the outline for my presentation here is, first I'll talk a little bit about what Kissimmee Waterkeeper is. Then I'll talk something about the categories of water issues and show how the issues we encountered here in Florida and Central Florida are not unique. They follow certain themes that prevail globally. And then I'll put these water issues into the context of planetary issues. There's a number, I think the number is 9 of different categories of planetary environmental boundaries that we're beginning to press and show how water interacts with many of those. And then I'll talk specifically about Central Florida water issues, their types and scale and how difficult they are to really address. Then I'm going to bring it back around to showing how these water issues are again integrated with these planetary boundaries and particularly with the issue of climate change. Kissimmee Waterkeeper extends from downtown Orlando, right around State Road 50 downtown, all the way to the shores of Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee itself is placed into the Colusa Waterkeeper program. There are 15 different waterkeeper programs around the state. There are 350 around the world, of which most are in the United States. Now, Kissimmee Waterkeeper is not a separate nonprofit organization. Instead, it is currently still sort of a subordinate program of what's called Intelligentsia International. And Intelligentsia is an organization I set up back in 1991 as a spinoff from some international projects we had done with through the National Association of Graduate Professional Students. So that organization, I host university students from around the world, and we work on a wide range of projects. I don't have any right now. We're just getting through COVID, and I haven't really restarted the program. But since '99, since leaving University of Florida, I've hosted over 500 university students, 74 countries, and keep some of them in LaBelle, most of them in LaBelle. Some in Gainesville, the university there, and some at USF in Tampa. And in 2015, we hosted 25 students from France to prepare for the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris. And I've got someone knocking at the door that wants my attention, but I'll just try to continue as best I'm permitted. I have a 14-month-old daughter, Amina. So most of my work has focused on agricultural best management practices, water quality BMPs. And this involves laboratory work, field work, instrumentation, computer simulation. I've also done work for water utilities, river restoration, energy analysis, energy projects, arsenic, a wide range of projects. After 40-something years, you tend to have encountered an awful lot of variety in your work. But focusing on water issues in Central Florida, all water issues typically break down into 3 categories. You've got your water supply issues, you've got your flood control issues, and then you've got your water quality issues. And where you place your priority is largely dictated by the freedom that you have maybe to focus on secondary issues such as water quality. If you're struggling with water supply limitations, that often is your top priority. If, on the other hand, you're suffering from too much water, then flood control becomes your immediate priority. And what we're seeing around the world now is something of a water whiplash. One moment you might be focused on water quality, and then all of a sudden weather conditions cause you to be without any water, and water supply becomes your priority. And then all of a sudden Mother Nature does a double take, and you're dealing with massive floods. So all of these issues interact with one another. Okay, thank you. And they can impact each other. For example, if you're focusing on water supply, then that can have an impact upon your water quality. If you're focusing upon flood control, that too can affect water quality or water supply. An example of that might be where, let's say you're trying to minimize flood potential in South Florida, so you're keeping Lake Okeechobee water levels low. Well, that can provide you with water quality benefits through the various dynamics that occur in the soils there. And if you're focusing on water supply, keeping that high, then that too can affect your water quality in the opposite direction. So placing these water issues in the context of the planetary boundaries, you can see here that there's 9 of these categories, and the further out the color radiates is the extent to which we're pressing those environmental boundaries of the planet. So traditionally, your water issues tend to focus on the freshwater change, and that's broken down into 2 categories, the green and the blue. The blue is what had traditionally been measured, which is the levels of our rivers and our lakes and streams and aquifers, basically our water supply storage areas. However, more recently, they've been looking at the green, what they call the green freshwater changes, and that's changes in our rainfall patterns, changes in our soil moisture conditions, and changes in evaporation or evapotranspiration. So we're in dire straits on the green water category. We have not nearly pressed our limits on the freshwater blue category. Whereas we might see in the news all sorts of articles about water problems on that level, that's not really an extreme problem yet at a planetary schedule. Some of the extreme problems include the genetic biodiversity, the nitrogen and phosphorus that we've introduced into the system, and the novel entities, the plastics, pesticides, and antibiotics. And all of these interact with the land systems. So you can see that most of these 9 categories have some impact upon or dependence upon water issues. So our overall planetary health, our environmental boundaries are very much integrated with our water issues. Now, overall, environmental impacts, I like to describe them as being a fairly simple function of population and then per capita consumption. If you take those 2 numbers and you multiply them by one another, you tend to get sort of a ballpark figure of the intensity of our environmental pressures at a planetary schedule. And then if you divide that number by our sustainable technology development, you can see that we can tolerate greater population and consumption if we adopt more sustainable technology. But this is a race to have the technology keep up with the population and the consumption, a race that we've been losing for many decades now. Now, consumption isn't necessarily a bad thing. We all enjoy it. We're all doing it right now. But it's important that as much as possible, our consumption is dedicated more toward the development of the sustainable technologies so that future populations can enjoy a large number of people as well as a comfortable standard of living, and that we can bring more people in this world up to a better standard of living. Now, as far as the issues of water in Central Florida, we've transformed the system over the past 150 years quite dramatically. It used to be a largely uncontrolled natural system with flow coming down from the Central Florida chain of lakes into an unregulated Lake Okeechobee, which would overflow its banks and naturally sheet flow down towards the Everglades. Today, however, it's all channelized, it's ditched and drained, such that the water that does fall in Central Florida now more rapidly flows into Lake Okeechobee and then flows out to the east and the west primarily. And the chemicals that come down the Kissimmee River into Lake Okeechobee have largely been derived from agricultural practices. Nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers, and other chemicals. And this has a dramatic impact upon Lake Okeechobee and then the coastal estuaries on both the East Coast and West Coast. So the hydrology and water quality of Central Florida affects all of South Florida. Now, this is something of a complicated slide, but I'll try to talk you through it a little bit. There's a lot of finger pointing that goes on. The coastal people will complain about the farming practices and its pollution. And the farmers will often point back and say, well, it's actually being caused by Orlando, or it's being caused by your coastal septic tanks. And we all share in the problem, in creating the problem. But it's important to look at the numbers carefully and determine what is actually the fact. And the facts support a conclusion that it is primarily agricultural. You'll see these red areas directly adjacent Lake Okeechobee. Those are the basins that contribute the most phosphorus flowing into Lake Okeechobee. The ones in yellow are the second greatest source, and the green ones are the lesser sources. So you can see the area of the Lake Wales Ridge, where it says 120, and then the Orlando area, Kissimmee area, also green with the number 98. Those have lower concentrations of phosphorus flowing down into Lake Okeechobee. However, that is not to say that these urban areas aren't polluting their local lakes. There's a large number of lakes up near Orlando that are suffering the wrath of urban pollution. So after these lakes tend to become saturated with the nutrients, it's only at that point they begin to dump that nutrient content downstream. So whereas Orlando is primarily polluting its local lakes, it's not the primary source of the problem in Lake Okeechobee. Rather, it's the agricultural basins directly adjacent to Lake Okeechobee. Now, this graph shows the history from the mid-1970s to current. The green shows the concentrations, the phosphorus concentration of water coming down the Kissimmee River into Lake Okeechobee. The blue shows the concentration of phosphorus within Lake Okeechobee. So as the Kissimmee River has continually provided excess nutrients, fertilizers into Lake Okeechobee, those soils have absorbed those nutrients, and now they're sort of in equilibrium where the inflow concentration is equal to the in-lake and outflow concentration. Now this graph here shows since about 1983, the load or the number of tons of phosphorus fertilizer that has flowed into Lake Okeechobee each year. And you can see these dots are up and down here and there, but basically when you run a regression, it's a dead flat line. In other words, it's not changing. When averaged out over the long term, it's fairly steady at about 500 metric tons per year. Now, we passed a national law to create limits on nutrient pollutions. And this is called total maximum daily loads. And the total maximum daily load determination for Lake Okeechobee is down there around 100. So there isn't a year that goes by that we do not grossly exceed that level. Now, when you look at the trend, you can see how it's more correlated to how much water is flowing into Lake Okeechobee. The more water, the more pollution. Then, if you add up the total flow and the total pollution, you get a dead straight line. You get a dead straight green line, which is the nitrogen inflows, and you get a dead straight red line, which are the phosphorus flows. And what that tells us is, despite having spent $2 billion to improve water quality, we are making absolutely no progress. If we were making progress, those lines would bend towards a more flatter trajectory. Making matters even worse, the Water Management District and U.S. Geological Survey recently did a study and determined that rainfall is increasing because of climate change. So if water quality is dependent upon rainfall and runoff, and rainfall is increasing, well, then we've got quite the challenge ahead of us. So, conclusions. The water quality problems in Central Florida have really not improved since the 1980s and actually are worsening due to development, agriculture, and increasingly climate change. And climate change consequences are really the dominant issue because those take thousands of years to remedy. Therefore, it's important that our water quality solutions do double duty. In other words, that they address both our water quality issues as well as our climate issues. And if we don't approach it that way, we're really being disingenuous in how we approach the issues. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We have a couple of questions in the chat. One is from Carl. What must be done with Florida's BMAP program to make it effective and expedient?
Well, first thing is you have to get away from the spreadsheets. They approach everything as if it's really just a video game where they're not really dealing with reality. They're dealing with theoretical, hypothetical improvements that can be achieved by implementing one project or another. So really, it has to have a connection to measurements.
Okay. And from Holly, can you tell us what is going on with the Western Everglades restoration?
I really cannot. A lot of these projects are extremely slow. When you look at the portfolio of the projects developed back in the 1990s and sort of codified in 2001, we're really only now beginning to implement many of those, and many of them have been discarded. So really the projects they're working on would have helped address them if we had actually implemented them in the early 2000s. Now with climate change, the scale of the problems that we're facing have risen by multiples. So therefore we have to revisit all of those project objectives and revise them, and we're not. We're simply pretending as if the situation is the same as it was in the 1980s and taking our own sweet time, decades, to implement the solutions to the 80s in the 2020s and 2030s. And that's just a formula for failure.
Okay, so our last question is, how can we stop Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera, from desecrating Seminole and Miccosukee burial grounds in the EAA?
The EAA is basically a government subsidized agricultural region. It's subsidized by having installed the water supply, the irrigation infrastructure, and the drainage infrastructure. And really that's a public asset. It should be treated as a public asset. Those farms are not really what I would describe as farms. They're more like strip mines in that it's organic soil that are oxidizing each year. And we're in effect transforming a half-inch of that organic soil into organic food materials each year. So I did a study back in 2012 for the Department of Energy looking at farming systems because they were talking about doing biofuels in the Everglades by growing sugarcane, converting it into ethanol, et cetera, whereas I pointed out, well, you could actually just scrape off a half-inch of that soil each year and shovel it into a furnace and generate electricity, and you save yourself all the difficulty of going through the process of agriculture. So there's a lot of really bizarre concepts out there that are all focused primarily on making money rather than serving people with food and fuel at a basic necessary level to sustain life.
Okay. So we do have one question from Stephen in the chat. If you could directly respond to that in chat, I'd appreciate it. I'm trying to be mindful of everybody's time, and we have several other speakers to get through. Thank you, John.
They're all significant. The population and the consumption are both taking off. Population is starting to slow its growth. Consumption is increasing its growth rate, and we really have to get cracking on the technology.
Okay. All right. So moving on to Hillary Coburn, who is speaking on behalf for Rabbi Luna of the Temple Bethel of Fort Myers. And I apologize if I've mispronounced any of that.
Hi, thanks for bringing us all together. So I am Hillary Coburn. I answer faster to Hill. I'm a physician, I'm a scientist, and I'm a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. I'm a fellow in the Cambridge Climate Alliance program, and I'm a member of the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. And I'm a Jew. And I was asked to speak when Rabbi Luna was not able to join us, and she's sorry she can't. I am going to speak. I'm not clergy, but I'm going to share my perspective from the denomination of Reform Judaism, and specifically with our national organization, the Union for Reform Judaism. So I was asked to speak specifically, and I hope I'm right about this, on the spiritual connection with water and our responsibility and the role of stewardship for the earth from the perspective of Reform Judaism. So specifically about water, the Reform Jewish movement for us, protecting water is an ethical, a moral, and a spiritual obligation. Water has an essential role in forming and sustaining life and is clearly a major part of our creation stories. And whether water is used to cleanse, bathe, heal, restore, replenish, or purify, water is a fundamental need for all of us. And it's one of our main universal common resources, stretching across time, place, and culture. Our bodies are mostly made out of water, and we rely on it for our very survival, and it's a truth that we've heard tonight also, that continues to become more resonant as the inequitable effects of climate change take hold in the forms of drought, rising temperatures, toxic blooms, natural disasters, and so much more. I was asked to give a couple of references, and Rabbi Luna helped me with this, of course. Moses compared the Torah, which is our Bible, to water. He said, Torah is like water that nourishes our souls. It has the power to change lives and gives each and every one of us the power to reach our full potential and become the people we were meant to be. Just as water permeates the soil to offer a proper environment for growth, so too does our religious teachings permeate our soul to provide opportunity for spiritual growth and the ability to help us grow into what we could become. Another biblical commentary is from Kohelet Rabbah, which many of you know as a discussion in Ecclesiastes, that reminds us that one generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. And we understand that as stewards of our environment, we have a responsibility to safeguard the planet so that future generations will have clean, usable water, and more than water. One of our most respected rabbis from the 11th century is named Rashi. He also compared the Torah with both rain and dew, two different parts. They both provide moisture, but in different ways with different impacts. And he compared that to the dual nature of biblical learning, that it can be sustaining and also enhancing our lives to show us the way to live and how to interact with each other. And regarding stewardship, in Judaism, there is a long tradition of being good stewards of the earth. And it's actually more than a tradition, it's part of our Jewish law. Again, in Ecclesiastes discussion, the Midrash we call it, expresses all that I have created, I created for you. Reflect on this and do not corrupt or desolate my world, for if you do, there will be no one to repair it after you. So the truth is, it's central to Reform Jewish belief that the idea is all humans are created in B'Tselem Elohim, which for us is the image of God, and that we are God's partners in improving the world. Our Jewish texts and traditions teach us that there is the dual responsibility to till and to tend in Genesis, and to love your fellow as yourself in Leviticus. And all of God's living creatures have intrinsic worth, and many of our faiths, many of our traditional faiths, specify that we are called to protect all species. Creation includes people, animals, plants, and as such, we need to heed the call to be faithful stewards of our entire world. So these laws and prescribed attitudes demonstrate clearly that Jewish religion tradition is especially sensitive to the well-being of the natural environment and upholds without a question the special human responsibility for proper management. Our written and oral wisdom sees humans as being responsible for the world in which we live, but we are participants in God's creation. And while it's our belief in that God says humankind is given dominion over the world, that role is as caretaker, not conqueror. The Jewish ideal of tikkun, which is often translated as to repair the world, it's a hallmark of Reform Judaism. And we strive to bring about a world of justice and wholeness and compassion. And if you take and combine the Jewish passion for justice and our ethics of responsibility together, it leads us to see that climate change is far more than an ecological or an environmental issue. Climate change is ethical, a public health, and a social justice issue. So as Reformed Jews, we have a responsibility and an obligation to be caretakers of our natural world and to preserve our ecosystem for future generations. And as stewards in God's creation, we are charged with protecting the integrity of the web of life. So let us all hope that tonight, as an example of being able to share perspectives, that we, including interfaith groups together, will help us be motivated to work together to actively protect the precious resource of water and more. And I, for one, am really looking forward to next steps. We've learned from surveys, including in the southwest part of Florida, but it's not just there, that we need to find ways that we can work together, that we can all work to save what we all believe in. And for the interfaith part of it, it's interesting that that continues to still be an acceptable way to help transform. So looking forward to hearing from you and grateful to be a part of this.
And thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing. We're going to transition now into another poet, Dr. Patricia Taylor Edmiston, who is a poet, author, as well as a humanitarian, will share her work with us now.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
The following poem I wrote in North Carolina. We have an old farmhouse in the Western Appalachian Mountains there. It's called A Prayer from Water and Stone. What would my prayer be if I whispered thanks to the Creator for this pure stream whose gulps and gurgles clear my mind of resentment and fear? The water tumbles down the mountain, over rocks and through marsh, to be captured below in a rusty pipe, so folks not be harmed after a heavy rain. Let not this beauty pass. Before me, a pool of cold spring water. Long-legged water striders propel themselves across the surface toward debris bits, mistaking them for edible morsels. They water walk in a circle, returning to the same speck, like we who repeat the same mistakes over and over. Help me change my ways. On the banks, purple asters and goldenrod consort with yellow and orange jewelry, known also as touch-me-nots. For the tightly coiled springs their pods hold. Children scream when the seeds spray at the slightest touch of their fingers. Lord, may I share my best with this hurting world. I climb a path alongside 5 waterfalls before reaching a solitary place. For millions of years, the water has flowed from some unknown source, boring tunnels through boulders, leaving polished holes in rock where salamanders and crayfish hide. Help me live well my remaining years. One more. Scientific theories say that the God particle, also known as the Higgs boson, gives mass to matter, and was the fuse that started the Big Bang. The God particle. I found the God particle, physicists seek, while looking out over a canyon where condors soar, high in the Peruvian Andes. While gazing, I also found myself. I found the God particle in the tiny barn owl, perched 6 feet away. It stared unblinkingly and set me straight. In the juvenile buck, his antlers just velvet knobs, he passed by my window, leaving courage. In my small breasts that, after my son's birth, became pillows of milk that nourished him. In sprightly white June flowers with genetic instructions to become sweet red raspberries for my morning cereal. In water from underground rivulets that emerge as a cold, clean stream, quenching all nature on its way to the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico. In last year's tomato seeds, saved and dried through winter, in their shoots, vines, yellow flowers, and in their plump red fruit. In towhees, doves, sparrows, juncos, chickadees, and chipmunks that dine together under the feeder. No talk of sex, politics, or religion. I found the God particle in the river from devastation to forgiveness. Healing comes after despair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Those are beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I'm trying to be mindful of people's time. We do have at least 3 other speakers, okay? So just keep that in mind, and thank you for sticking with us. I will be presenting on Northwest Florida quality issues, so give me a second to get it set up, and I'll share my screen in just 1 second. Okay. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. Again, my name is Mary Gutierrez, environmental scientist with Earth Ethics, also the Northwest Florida Director for the Right to Clean and Healthy Water campaign. Here's a geographical area of the Northwest Florida that I oversee with regards to the Clean Water Healthy campaign. And I bring this up because although we all live in the same state, not everybody knows the counties and cities within the state. So this is the 16 county area of the Northwest Florida, or also referred to as the Panhandle. Okay, so our waterways, we are made up of beaches, springs, waterfalls, rivers, lakes, ponds, and creeks. These are just some of our water bodies that are here in the Northwest Florida area. We are home to one of the only waterfalls in the state of Florida, and that is located in Chipley, Florida. And who knew that Florida would actually have a waterfall, but yes, we do. All right, so each one of these areas have their own special impairment. I'm not bragging about that, but that's unfortunately a truth. Some are obviously more impaired than others, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And some of the issues and concerns that we're facing up here is population growth. And with that, obviously, comes land clearing associated with population growth, which leads to sedimentation, impaired water quality, and things of that nature. We are also concerned about nutrient runoff in the forms of pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, whether they're used industrially or whether they're used by homeowners who really don't know the correct way in which to use these things. Or if they were to actually stick with planting native species, they wouldn't even need to use pesticides, herbicides, or insecticides. We're also experiencing sea level rise in in this area as well. Maybe not to the same extent as Central and South Florida, but yes, we have seen sea level rise in this area. A concern for us, I'm sure as it is with the other parts of the state, is the saltwater intrusion associated with sea level rise. We get our drinking water from the Floridan aquifer and the sand and gravel aquifer up here. So any saltwater intrusion to that would obviously impair our drinking water supply here. We are also known for our deep well injection issues and projects up here, or companies rather, especially heavy in Escambia and Santa Rosa County, where they allow industrial plants to actually deep well inject their waste. It's not supposed to be hazardous waste, but waste nonetheless, beneath the aquifer. However, these deep well injections are self-regulated. So who really knows if they're leaking or anything of that nature? And of course, this could affect our water quality and just overall provide groundwater contamination as well to our springs. We have a lot of springs here and our rivers and things of that nature. Chemical pollution, a lot of these pollutions are because of these industrial facilities that what we have here in Northwest Florida, which are really heavy in Escambia County. There are chemicals that are being part of the wastewater stream that are not actually regulated by state and federal government. So that obviously raises concerns as well. We know of some of the things that are going into our water bodies, but we don't know about the ones that are not currently being regulated. So those are obviously alarming and cause water quality impacts. Agricultural pollution, we do have some ag land up here in the northern parts of most of the counties. And of course, the concern associated with that is increased nitrate through livestock manures and the use, obviously, of fertilizers as well. Okay, so before I get into this, I just want to mention really quickly. So one of the concerns I have personally, and we've actually had meetings on this previously, is the overpopulation and overdevelopment that's occurring in our area due to the growth, unchecked growth is how I refer to it as. There's a lot of people that have discovered Northwest Florida and they're wanting to move here, and at the same time they're wanting their big houses with their manicured lawns and their non-native species, which are of course not doing anything for the land, and it's certainly not doing anything for the water, our water quality, because of, like I mentioned before, fertilizers, insecticides, and things like that. And it's not only, it's impacting other species as well as a public health issue. And then of course, it's impacting the environment. So yes, there are issues throughout Northwest Florida. Some are less than others, but I did want to touch on this specifically. I'm not going to get into a bunch of numbers and stuff like that, but so Escambia County is probably the largest city between, the western portion of the state and when you get to Tallahassee. And Pensacola is an older city. It has a lot of legacy pollution associated with it. So back in 1999, a special grand jury was convened to assess local air and water quality in Escambia County. And basically, I can read this to you really quickly. The final report assessed regulators of ignoring and concealing violations, of bowing to industry and businesses rather than serving the public, of squandering the area's precious resources for fleeting gain, and of mocking and maligning the citizens group that tried to fill the void left by government inaction. So like I said, and so they specifically named the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in this grand jury report. The big picture, or the sticking point for this for me, is that 20 years later, they essentially did a follow-up and pretty much just found out, or just, confirmed that nothing had really actually been done. A few things have been done, but not really that much had been done in order to address these issues that have been impacting the Escambia County for quite some time. So currently, these are just a few statistics. There's 893 metropolitan areas in the US, and Pensacola area ranks number 12 for toxic release per square miles. This can be found on the toxic release inventory for any community. It is on the EPA website, and you can find out who is emitting what in your community. You just have to usually go in and just epa.gov/TRI, I believe it is, and put in your zip code, and it'll pull up what industries are in your area, if any, and then what they're releasing into the atmosphere. Air quality issues are water quality issues due to atmospheric deposition, whether it's wet deposition or it's dry deposition. Dry deposition falls on the land, wet deposition falls in the water. So you can still impact, obviously, water through air. So it is important, and it is tied together, as we've heard from other speakers and the poets even, and faith-based leaders. Okay, so DEP's list of impaired waters includes 14 Escambia County water bodies, and it includes a bay as well as Pensacola Bay and Upper Perdido Bay and many others. And that list can be found on the DEP's impaired website, waterways list. But take that with a grain of salt, because they have been known not to do what they're supposed to do. So I do want to share that these are some of our local waters that Bayou Chico, Tahar, Marcus, Carpenter's Creek, 11 Mile Creek, and all fall below state standards. Sometimes there's water has to be, those water bodies are actually closed to any type of recreation and things of that nature. I will say there have been improvements historically on Bayou Tahar specifically. There used to be, or actually Bayou Chico also, there used to be regular fish kills and things of that nature. So there has been an improvement with regards to that. Okay, so in conclusion, I like to keep it short and sweet. Parts of Northwest Florida is victim to legacy pollution, like I mentioned before, from industry and things of that nature, with their wastewater discharges, as well as those that are allowed to do deep well injection. Other once pristine areas are now being impacted by unchecked growth and development, which is impacting everything environmental. And it is up to us, the citizens, to protect our natural resources and elect officials that share this philosophy. I don't know what the struggle is down there with regards to in Central and South Florida with regards to this, but up here it's painful, and I'll just leave it at that. And we need to make smart choices on how we choose to live our lives, being aware that our actions have consequences. So we also need to take responsibility of, like that just says, on how we live our lives and the impacts that we are actually having to our brothers and sisters in the environment, as well as to other human beings. So take responsibility, as well as having other organizations, groups, and people that are supposed to be regulating the environment, or, and I use that term loosely, make sure that they're doing their job and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, so what can you do? Get engaged, involved at the local state level, hold those responsible accountable, educate yourself and others on how we impact water quality and changes we can make. Be the change you want to see, take action, sign the petition, spread the word. And you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. And that is all for me. And now I am going to pass it over to John Daniels.
Mary, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, hello, everybody. Mary, first I want to thank Mary for inviting me to spend a little bit of time talking about care for the creation from the Catholic perspective. If right now, the Catholic perspective, as I'm sure most of you know, if you just watch the news, is very interesting these days since the election of Cardinal Bergoglio of Argentina became Pope, and the publication of Laudato Si. I must admit, when I saw Pope Francis first walk out on the balcony in Rome after he became Pope, I had absolutely no idea what to expect. I must say that I was particularly pleased. To be honest, as a Catholic, I think it's pretty obvious, probably to most, that for many Catholics, certainly in North America, Pope Francis is bringing a prophetic message that we've been wanting to hear for a long time. For others, they're on the receiving end of a prophetic message that usually the prophets in the Old Testament leveled at Israel. Typically when I talk to folks about Laudato Si, I say, yes, it does represent what the Catholic Church is doing. But I think it's really important to recognize that right now the Catholic Church is going through an important painful time, I think, as the church as a whole tries to make sense of Pope Francis and what he's doing. I think a church community being in pain is a good sign. That means it's actually dealing with the gospel, at least as this particular Catholic thinks of it. When Laudato Si was published in 2015, I was pleasantly shocked and surprised about the scope of the document. We got word soon after Pope Francis became Pope that he was going to write an encyclical about the environment. But actually what came out, what Pope Francis produced was a document that's much more complex. I like to refer to Laudato Si and Pope Francis, what he does and what he says most of the time, as a daring exercise of the prophetic imagination. Now, that's a phrase coined by an Old Testament theologian named Walter Brueggemann. But the Old Testament prophets, especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, and Hosea, those are the chief ones that come to mind. Their message to Israel in antiquity, their prophetic message to them was, basically prophecy speaking for God. And their message to Israel was that Israel is acting like empire and not keeping covenant. And so that was basically their message. Laudato Si stands in that tradition of prophetic imagination. The exercise of prophetic imagination that Laudato Si is something that calls into question the dominant narrative that's in part of our culture today. The goods of the earth are ours to do with as we please, and those goods are unlimited. And of course, as it shakes down in our society, those goods are for the consumption, primarily the consumption and benefit of the very few, to the neglect of the poor and the most vulnerable. That is, I think, what Laudato Si is doing. It's pointing that out. It's addressing that narrative. It's suggesting a counter narrative to it, and that's where the Catholic Church is right now. There's two key words that I do want to bring up that lie at the core of the document, or two key phrases. One is integral ecology. And that's something that Pope Francis talks about, is trying to aim as people, for an integral ecology, the word integral implying that everything in all of creation, and this is actually what the Hebrew Bible says in the creation narratives in Genesis, is that everything is connected, everything comes from God, everything's so integrally connected. For example, many of you might know this, that the first human being's name, Adam, in Hebrew is Adam, and the root of that first human being's name, Adam, is the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth. And so some theologians now are actually translating Adam from the Hebrew Bible as earthling, which I like. I think it's pretty cool. But anyway, Pope Francis focuses on that. The entire document focuses on how everything is connected. Everything comes from the same material, Adamah, afar, the dust, and things like that. And this is all part of the major theme of Laudato Si. The other important phrase in Laudato Si, I think, is ecological conversion, and this is the part of the prophetic utterance. The first part of the prophetic utterance out of Pope Francis's mouth in Laudato Si is the church people, we're not keeping covenant, and that's taking care of one another, taking care of all of creation. The suggestion, the implied suggestion of the prophetic utterance is ecological conversion. And so it challenges all people to recognize the integral connection between all created things, and this, so that we can actually see and flesh out in real life the integrity of God's creation. What I think is important to understand about Laudato Si, it's not simply about caring for the environment. This is something that's important to remind a lot of my Catholic friends that I teach about this document. It's not just about the environment, but it's also takes seriously a famous quote by a liberation theologian named Leonardo Boff. Actually, it's the title of a book. Laudato Si takes seriously the fact that the cry of the earth, the condition is also the cry of the poor. And those two go hand in hand. The poor are the most vulnerable to the degradation. That's as far as human being goes. Pope Francis himself has said that also the most vulnerable are the animals and the plants. But it's not just about the creation, it's about human beings, because we are part of that. And that the deterioration of the environment and of society affects the most vulnerable people on the planet. And the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest. They will be the first to feel the results of, for example, climate change that we're beginning to feel right now. So just to sum up, that's where the Catholic Church is right now. I think it's an interesting conversation we're having. It's passionate, and there's a lot of education, or the ecclesial word for that is formation, that still needs to happen among Roman Catholics, and of course of all folks of all faith traditions. So that's all I got. Thank you. Quite all right. I will go ahead and the Creation Care Ministry at the Cathedral of St. Augustine, where I'm a parishioner. It has a YouTube website that has three formation videos about covenant and creation, which were offered quite a while ago, 2 or 3 years ago now, I think. And I will provide those links in the chat, and also my email. So if folks want to contact me, they can do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. I guess we're all a little choked up with all of the beautiful information we're hearing tonight. So I don't know about you all, but I feel like tonight's event was very much like a quilt we just made together, patching together what seems to be very different things, science and faith and passionate expressions. But at the same time, we're able to step back and see the patterns, the harmony of how everything fits together when we're focused on something so fundamental and essential as clean water. So it's like we're all so very different, but we're one. Anyway, my name is Mel Martin, and I'm the campaign coordinator for the Florida Right to Clean Water campaign. And I'm going to do my best to make this quick so everyone can get back to your evening routines. First off, we are grateful for your time tonight, and we hope you enjoyed and maybe even learned from the wide variety of perspectives and insights and beautiful expressions presented by our guest speakers tonight. What a treasure trove of information and wisdom. So thanks to each of you again. As you know, tonight's event is a kickoff event to focus on over a period of about 3 months between today, September 1st, and Thanksgiving, November 24th, on a centering on stewardship. The issue of water protection can sometimes get complex with numbers and data and can get science heavy and perhaps even confused or distracted by politics. But as we all know, knowing exactly what's going on is a necessary part to ensuring that our actions for effective stewardship are good actions and not a waste of precious time. The group sponsoring the Citizens Initiative to create a fundamental right to clean and healthy waters, so it's the board of Florida Rights of Nature Network, would like to engage in a deeper conversation with our fellow Floridians regarding the issue of good stewardship and what that looks like. I feel comfortable in speaking on behalf of the board that we each have a connection with water and nature in general, and that connection goes very deep, which is why we each feel compelled to do something about it, to take meaningful action and to truly and effectively protect waters throughout Florida, to commit to volunteering a good chunk of our week, every week, to coordinate this campaign. And if you don't know, in order for us to qualify for the 2024 ballot, we need to submit around 1 million signed petitions before next year, November 2023. So this beautiful challenge is exactly why we hope to reach out to and to any and all like-hearted Floridians to help, not just to sign a petition, please do that, by the way, but to help collect more signatures with us, or if you can't do that, please help support in any way or fashion or means possible. The right to clean water is the right to good stewardship. The amendment itself is a legal fail-safe to ensure the state government does what we expect it to do, to ensure their actions and policies of inaction cause no harm to Florida waters, whether they're springs, lakes, rivers, bays, estuaries, lagoons, aquifers, coastal waters, all of it. When it doesn't, when a state agency harms or threatens to harm any of these waters, this amendment gives us the ability to do something about it legally. It's that simple. So we welcome you to review the petition's full language on our website, floridarightocleanwater.org. And if you have any questions or would like to request a speaker, a presentation, or more information, we are standing by to assist. And as was mentioned in the beginning, this is a season of growth between now and near the end of November. We welcome and would love to share in discussions, prayers, ceremonies, events, music, art, poetry, and other ways to express our connections with not only water, but each other in our shared need for clean water. So please consider this an open and a standing invitation to join in this journey with us. Like I said before, sign a petition if you haven't already. Share on social media tonight what you took away from this event, if you want to. Support however you can. if you share in this deep connection with our ethical and moral and faith-based responsibility for good stewardship. While some thoughts may still need some time to germinate, you may have ideas and intentions you're ready to explore right away. And if you are more than welcome to join us on our Friday morning Centering on Stewardship subcommittee meetings, 10 a.m. Eastern. So if you're interested, please contact us through the website. With that, I thank you once again on behalf of the Florida Right to Clean Water campaign, and thank you, Mary, for hosting. And again, our wonderful guest speakers. I'm looking forward to what comes next and hope you're all excited as well. So have a wonderful evening and good night. Back to you, Mary.
Yes, thank you guys, everybody. We have several of the Rights to Clean Water board members on the call here. If they want to drop their email in the chat really quick before everybody leaves, or just go to the Rights to Clean Water .org to get their contact information. And pay attention or keep in a lookout for additional meetings that are going to be happening, whether in person or virtually. Okay. Thank you guys, everybody. And I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.